Today's episode is with Robert Cheetham. We're talking about Japan. So let's have a quick look at what the Geo 500 says. You can see I've segmented it by country here, and our eyes zero in on the top three. We've got Terra Drone Corporation, QPS Holdings, and Synspective. It is interesting to see that the top performers are all Earth observation companies of some sort, and that there is this theme, two of them amongst the top three being synthetic aperture radar. So we're in good hands here because we have the author of the Japan Earth Observer newsletter. Okay, Robert Cheetham, former founder and CEO of Xavier, now owner of Abaca Labs and publisher of Japan Earth Observer newsletter. Welcome on Geospatial FM.
Thanks so much, Will. It's an honor to be here.
Tell us a bit more about who you are and also about this newsletter.
I ran a geospatial software engineering consultancy called Xavier for about 25 years and grew that company to a little over 50 people, and then sold the company a couple of years ago. And after that, while I decided to go out on my own and continue to do research and strategy consulting under the Abaca Labs moniker. I also took it as a chance to reconnect with an earlier part of my career. Prior to getting involved in geospatial technology, I had studied Japanese and lived in Japan for 4 years, working in local government. And after some travel and spending time in Japan, after I sold my company, I felt like it was really, I really loved being there. I loved reconnecting with the language and the people and the culture, and felt like I needed to try to find a way to reintegrate that part of my life with what I'd been doing over the last 25 years. So that led me to start this newsletter about a year and a half ago, Japan Earth Observer. So I've been trying to make that publishing on approximately monthly cadence, though I've been increasing that cadence this year to every couple weeks. Basically a news roundup, as well as some kind of long form article once a month related to the space, Earth observation or remote sensing, and geospatial ecosystem in Japan.
So clearly you have a huge amount of technical depth, but also some cultural depth. It's really nice to hear that you got to a point where you could sell a business. That's amazing. And then, yeah, as you said, reconnect with what was meaningful for you in the past and leverage your connection to and expertise in Japan there. It's a very lively entrepreneurial scene in geospatial generally and Earth observation. They had a couple of moon landings, did they not?
They've had a few attempts. The Japanese government space agency called JAXA had an attempt with its SLIM lander. They very successfully pinpoint landing within a few meters of their target, so it was successful in that sense. But then it got on the ground and toppled over.
Okay,
so
it was a moon collision.
Well, it wasn't a collision. They were able to still do good science from the toppled over position. Okay. And accomplished a lot of their objectives anyway, but it wasn't flawless. Then they have as a publicly traded firm called iSpace, not to be confused with an identically named Chinese company called iSpace. iSpace has been really focused on building out a lunar and cislunar transportation and other kinds of services, and has made a couple of attempts to send landers there. And each case, they've accomplished most of their goals except for the landing part. They've either lost the lander or collided hard with the moon. So,
okay. Nevertheless, there's a lot of inspiring efforts, and
absolutely,
there's not many countries that can lay claim to at least attempting and getting something on the moon. So yeah, clearly a worthy area of concentration. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to extracting as much as we can our view about this exciting space. I also want to say it's nice to know that you know Japanese, and I can slip in a couple of words myself. One that I remembered is shinbun. Is that the word for newspaper?
Yeah.
There we go. So how would you say Japan Earth Observer newsletter in Japanese?
I'd probably say Japan Asa Observer.
Azaba.
But Earth observation is Chikyu Kansoku. So you could potentially say Nihon, so Japan, Chikyu, which is Earth, Kansoku, which is observe, and observer. You could potentially say Kansokusha, perhaps, but
So do they say
gen
newsletter? Do they have their own word for newsletter, or would you say Shinbun? Or
no, you wouldn't say Shimbun. People would probably say newsletter.
oh, really? So it's like a
So
just
Japan,
the
a Japanified version
English.
of it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. Okay, cool. All right. So something else I appreciated is that you've recently published you referred to your longer form pieces. One of them recently was a history of the Japanese trading houses. So what are the big five Japanese trading houses?
At the risk of diving into history a little bit too much, the trading houses, all all of the big ones that are around today, mostly arose in the period after 1868, when after Japan had been forced to reopen in terms of allowing foreign trading in the country. That was called the Meiji Revolution or Meiji Restoration in 1868. It was the end of the shogunate and the beginning of a new political era. In the ensuing few decades, Japan went from really not being that industrialized to being an industrial superpower, as well as one of the major military powers in the world. So, over the course of that period of time, a number of individuals that eventually became family enterprises um, built out the industrial capacity of Japan, mostly in the private sector, but often with support from the government. And these became uh, uh, all not quite monopolistic in any particular area, but and certainly very wealthy and powerful family conglomerates. So some of those that people would probably recognize today are as household names are Mitsubishi or Mitsui or Sumitomo. These were often not a single company, but many companies. So Mitsubishi began as a shipping enterprise and then got into shipbuilding and then got into machinery and other things. And the trading houses arose because Japan doesn't have a ton of resources. So it's a resource poor place in terms of mining, in terms of so metals, in terms of energy. There's no coal. These volcanic islands just don't have a lot of the
They
resources
got a
that you
lot of
need.
wood.
Got a lot of wood, yeah, and there is some mining for steel and things like that. But Japan needed to import a lot and also wanted to export, value-added products. And these trading houses arose as a mechanism to support the larger family conglomerate, in terms of getting stuff in, materials and raw materials and other inputs, and then being able to sell that material back out.
Yeah,
So
there's as an Australian, I can make a modern reference to this enterprise because there's a controversy, probably the largest political controversy in the past year in Australia about the essentially free or tax-free or royalty-free gas that's being sent from Australia to Japan via these trading houses,
it's
presumably
probably being sold to a trading house. Yeah.
yeah, for the purposes of creating these amazing value-added products. There's Komatsu, for example, Kubota. These are in the precision agricultural vertical of the Geo 500,
Yeah.
but also they're just general construction machinery makers. And some of
Yeah.
the mining trucks, the excavators they make are incredible in terms of an example of a value-added product.
Yeah. So these trading houses arose to support the larger, at the time, they became known as zaibatsu, these family houses, family conglomerates. And they looked a little bit like maybe if you were to try to compare them to Western structures, a bit like the Dutch East Indies Company or the East India Company in the UK, or in contemporary terms, a place like Berkshire Hathaway. That's just is involved in a lot of different stuff, and in the process of being involved in many enterprises, learns a lot about what's going on in the world. So these zaibatsu ended up as supporting the war. Some of them were partially, nationalized in order to support the war. But after the war, they were seen as holding back uh, the development of the Japanese economy by the American occupation. And so the U.S. occupation insisted on and forced the dissolution of and breakup of these family conglomerates. So they
So
did
this is around the
something
1950s.
to be actually probably almost immediately after the war. So 1946 initially,
Wow.
and what they did, it only lasted a few years, but it was pretty impactful. Um, they and if you think about the problems of monopoly and conglomerates today, some of the bold things that people did, 80 years ago are pretty incredible. So they forced the top 2,000 executives out of these conglomerates. Basically said, you're fired and you can't have a job in any of these places indefinitely. And then they forced the breakup of them. While they were separate enterprises, they all had cross shareholding arrangements so that
Yep.
essentially everyone owned everyone within a conglomerate. So there
I
might
feel
be,
like that phenomenon still exists today to some extent.
it's much less than it used to be.
Okay.
So the Americans essentially forced the breakup, like they literally took a company and broke it up into little bits, or took a conglomerate and forced them all apart. Um, Fired everyone at the top, and then said, "Okay, now go back to, now go back to working."
This is what you
And
call a revolution.
it was an economic revolution. And while the American occupation reversed course a few years later when the Korean War got started, and it seemed that Japan was going to be important to supplying the war effort in Korea, um, it had a huge impact. Those conglomerates never quite, they did recoalesce to some extent, but they never quite came back in the same way. And it gave a few years window in which just a ton of innovation and company formation was unleashed. And one could probably, there's a uh, author, Katz, who's written about this a little bit in a historical sense. One could probably credit a lot of the Japanese economic miracle with this forced dissolution of these large family conglomerates after World War II. And then the dynamism that arose from that, even though they recoalesced to some extent, was pretty incredible. It
Okay, so
supercharged the economy.
I have to jump in here. I
Yeah,
mean, this for surely not only me. What's in many people's minds hearing you say this is what could happen, because it just sounds like a massive trust busting or monopoly busting
yeah,
exercise.
absolutely,
And
yeah,
I feel like there's a lot of consternation in the underclass, as it were, in America, but probably not just America, about a lot of corporate consolidation and the emergence of monopolies and the
yeah,
underclass being squeezed. Can't help but feel like maybe a dose of the same could help here.
yeah. I feel the same way. If I mean, I think the United States has gone through periods of trust busting. The last major one was the Sherman Antitrust Act back in the beginning of the 20th century. And we've occasionally had monopoly breakups like AT&T and so on. But I think a wholesale, like you can do wholesale breakups. There is the legal power to do so, and they are not necessarily bad for the economy. They can really unleash a lot of dynamism. Certainly, the fact that that we have these huge companies like Meta and Google and Amazon and so on, while it does enable certain kinds of businesses to form, it prevents a lot of others. And
I
so,
mean,
yeah,
just look at Meta. I mean, look at what poor Mark Zuckerberg is trying to do as he, tries to keep up with, whatever the next trend is.
yeah,
And, for example, he changed the whole company's name to Meta, went after the metaverse, poured $80 billion into it, and what have we got? They had in this, 3D world, with the usual snide criticisms about the avatars having no legs, 900 people in these worlds with
Yeah.
$80 billion being spent on it. So clearly, it looks like, yeah, we could benefit from a dose of this activity. All right, so you've blown through literally 3 agenda items there. Did you say 1868 is when the first?
1868 was when some of these companies were even forming before that, but
So let's call it 1870.
18
And
yeah,
did you say they were
1868.
called a Keiditsu?
Sorry, the early structures were called zaibatsu. The
Zaibatsus.
the zaibatsu were forced to break up after World War II by the
Okay.
American occupation, and then
Okay.
they kind of gradually recoalesced. And many of
Okay.
them were the same networks that had been there before, but they were,
Sorry, I just wanted to hit the pause button for a second.
yeah.
So it sounds like we had, I'm going to say, about 70 years of consolidation and monopoly formation, if you like, around these trading houses up until World War II. Are there any comments you have about these trading houses' participation actually in World War II? For example, you've got Volkswagen in Germany and, IBM from the US and what they did in World War II. Are there any interesting tidbits from history about what any of these companies did, if you have any brief comments there during World War II? Did they make
Certainly, I
the
mean,
Zero fighters, for example,
yeah,
Mitsubishi?
absolutely, yeah. So, I mean, obviously, if you're huge industrial conglomerates, in Japan's case, it would be places like Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, Kawasaki Heavy Industries, and so on. They were all harnessed into supporting the war effort and manufactured the ships and planes and tanks and all the other things. And the fact that there were a small number of them by the time the war came around made it easier for the government to force them. Some of
You're
them
making these
resisted.
factories. You're making, yeah, okay.
Yeah, so some of them resisted initially, but I mean, by the by the late 1930s, the government was basically controlled by the military, and it was very hard to say no, impossible to say no.
Okay, so we've
Um,
got, did you say Mizui was one of them?
the big well, there were probably 6 or so at the
So
end
you
of
said
the
Mitsubishi,
war.
Kawasaki,
Kawasaki was part of another one. So there was Mitsubishi, Mitsui,
Mitsui.
Sumitomo,
Yep.
uh, and then there was a pair called Ito and another one called Marubeni. That
Marubeni.
after
Is
yeah,
it
that after
Itochu now?
that those two came together and formed Itochu.
Okay.
There was also a Nisho and Nichimen that came together into another cluster after the war called Sojitz.
Wow,
And
so
then
we're up to
there's
6.
yeah,
Okay,
that's at
because of the
least 6.
consolidation, we're down to 5. Okay, because there was Ito and Mizui that combined, was it?
Ito and Marubeni combined
Excuse me.
to
Marubeni. Okay.
create Itochu, and
Okay.
then Nisho and Nichiren combined to form Sojitz. Um, it became more complicated in the 70s when some of the large banks that anchor what were now called keiretsu, these sort of still networks, but a little more loosely affiliated. Some of these banks began to merge, and so we still have the Mitsubishi Group, we still have the Mitsui Group, we still have the Sumitomo Group, but the a number of others were combined into Mizuho or MUFG. So they're a little bit more the financial part anchor of the conglomerates of these industry clusters is kind of a little bit more consolidated today. But as sort of industrial collaboration systems, many of them there's still the big five that operate it somewhat independently.
Okay. And so now they are referred to as kaidetsu, and your historical study, if you like, basically speaks to the century-old origins in family businesses
Yeah.
That even though they now have professional management, there nevertheless is these family origins that you can trace back to.
Yeah.
Do those founding families still have some control in any of these now kaidetsus?
I wouldn't say control because the um, the U.S. occupation essentially took away all the shares,
Wow.
and but there are still later generations of people that are involved in management, but I would say they're largely professionally managed and no longer family controlled per se.
Yeah.
What makes them, it continues to make them powerful is as social networks. So, and they're not monopolies. They're more like a group of affiliated companies. At one point, they had a lot of cross shareholdings. Those cross shareholdings have largely been unwound today. There were a lot of reforms in the 90s and early 2000s that forced them to unwind a lot of the cross shareholdings, but they're still like the human relationships. And so they have what they call president's councils, weekly meetings where the senior people of the anchor companies in each of these networks get together and coordinate their efforts. And not necessarily in a negative way. Like I don't think
They're
they're
not
price
cartels.
fixing. Yeah, they're not cartels, but they're affiliated companies that get together and make sure that they're supporting each other. So
Yeah.
the usually there's a bank at the center of it's an anchor organization, like a large commercial bank. There's usually then a big industrial entity, and there's usually one of these trading houses.
Yeah. Okay.
And
I'm going
those,
to use that as a segue into the geospatial dimensions of this, only because I found out about a Mitsubishi-related bank or investment firm
mhm.
that participated in dynamic map platform. So I also saw, is it you mentioned MUFG? Is that a Mitsubishi-related investment bank?
It began as that, yeah, but it now
Right.
MUFG now spans a few of the historic Keiretsu. Historically, you could think about the trading houses as export-import brokers. They've gone far beyond that today, so they're more like a combination of export-import, which they still do, but they're also investment vehicles for these groups, often not just, let's say, buying and selling raw materials and outputs, but also taking investments in something. Uh, and often not a controlling interest, but sometimes. So let's take an example that's very topical for today. Uh, the rare earth metals. So China has, 90% of the global market on rare earth metals. China used this against Japan. I think it was around 2014 or so, and banned sales of heavy metals to Japan for a period of time. Japan got the message, and over the last 12 years or so, they've been investing in um, creating their own supply chain for rare earth metals. So the trading houses and the finance behind them, the banks, are a key part of how this gets executed. So the government doesn't go out and invest in rare earth metals. One of these trading houses will. So one has bought a large share in an Australian
I was
rare
about to
earth
say, there's going to
rare
be an
earth
Australian mine here somewhere.
Yeah, Australian rare earth mining company, enough that they injected a lot of extra capital to enable to scale that mining operation. But rare earth metal mining is only the first step. You got to do the processing. So they then set up invest in another affiliate in Malaysia, where so they ship the raw material to Malaysia. Malaysia then processes it, and then they facilitate the sale of that finished rare earth metal material back into Japanese companies in Japan for use in manufacturing. So that'd be a contemporary example of how the trading companies facilitate a key sort of national strategic initiative And at the same time, it's made easier because they have these common relationships with the industrial conglomerates that are going to use that material, uh, uh, as well as the investment capital to put into the effort.
And I can't help but think that, uh, their efforts to protect that supply of rare earths could be used then to facilitate uh, complex modern manufacturing, such as of the sort that eventually produces something that you might propel into space. So
Yes,
tell us
absolutely.
directly, in the last 10 minutes here, about the actual efforts of these companies, these kaidetsus, to
Yeah.
send things into space.
So I think it's important to say the Keiretsu don't control the economy in Japan. They are one part of the economy, and there are a lot of unaffiliated companies across the technology ecosystem in particular that don't have affiliations with any of the historic Keiretsu. So many of the startups today, like iSpace or Astroscale or Synspective and so on, they may get some of their financing and so on, but they're not affiliated with any Keiretsu, and they may take investment from all of them. So they may have investment partnerships or other kinds of technology partnerships with all of them.
That's how I put Marubeni in, for example, because I saw that they made an investment in a new space startup.
Yeah, so these firms are, in some cases, they're very dominant within a part of the space and geospatial ecosystem. So, for example, the Mitsubishi Group has both Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, which is the primary manufacturer of rocket components for the H-3 rocket, and has been the primary manufacturer for rocket components for the H-series rockets, as well as the predecessor N-series rockets going back to the 1980s. And a lot of that harks back to their work, building fighter jets and helicopters and other sorts of things. Um, there's also Mitsubishi Corporation, which is the name of the trading house in the Mitsubishi Group. Mitsubishi Corporation is a key investor in a number of both Japanese and non-Japanese space efforts. So they've taken a big share in one of the space station, uh, commercial space station efforts. And in fact, almost every one of the space station efforts are not Japanese companies, but they all have one of these trading houses as a key investor in every one of them, or as a partner. So these are a mechanism whereby Japan can extend uh, uh, um, its influence, be part of some larger, broader effort that maybe the home economy, the domestic economy, doesn't have a champion. But if they've got a key strategic interest, the trading houses are a mechanism whereby they can invest in many different efforts.
It's fascinating. I mean, I also had to put one of the versions of Mitsubishi in the autonomous systems vertical. And I had to actually migrate from the HD mapping vertical most of the car manufacturers into the autonomous systems vertical because they're all now
Sure.
basically making robots of a sort. They've
Right.
got wheels, but they can detect and respond through simultaneous location and mapping, or SLAM, to changes in the environment. So Mitsubishi,
Yeah.
also is a participant there, but that's another version of geospatial. We're talking about Earth observation
Yeah.
today.
So Mitsubishi Heavy Industries makes rockets. Mitsubishi Electric, totally different company, but part of the same group, um, is probably the biggest central satellite manufacturer. So they make a lot of the really large, complex satellites that drive Japan's navigation satellite network constellation, as well as a lot of its government-funded Earth observation satellites. Uh, so the so there's those are like big players, but then there almost all of the small satellite makers have no affiliation with any of the Keiretsu. So places like ArcEdge Space, Synspective, IQPS, and so on, both of which are doing SAR satellite constellations. They may get some investment funds from a lot of the financial institutions but are otherwise independent of and operate without any of these affiliations.
Fascinating. So is Honda also related to a Keidetsu or one of these trading houses at all? I ask because they're the ones that have landed a rocket recently, I heard.
Yeah, Honda's a great example of one of the post-war companies that arose and grew without a significant
Because of the trust busting.
yeah, without a
Yeah.
significant Keidetsu affiliation. Now,
Yeah.
so the auto manufacturers often operate a different kind of Keidetsu, what people sometimes call a vertical Keidetsu. So a vertical network in which Toyota is a bit like this too. It's not really part of any of the historic Keidetsu, but they operate their own hierarchical Keiretsu of which they are the center. So they have significant stakes in or have significant ability to guide the efforts of all of their whole supply chain.
I was going to say,
Um,
so they own a lot of the raw material suppliers, even down to the mines, or have stakes in.
well, they don't outright own them, but they might hold shares in
Sure.
them
Yeah.
or have executive relationships or help
Yeah.
fund them, provide loans perhaps to expand capacity, things like that.
Incredible.
So yeah, Honda's a great example in the sense that rocketry and robotics as well, and fuel cells all are directly arise from their automobile manufacturing, and they're a great example also in the sense of they have a real culture of innovation. They're constantly looking for new markets, and so they were early developers of fuel cells, so they're now extending that fuel cell idea into fuel cells for use in a moon base and
Awesome.
uh,
So it
rockets
sounds like it's
directly.
going to be the Japanese that are going to get there first. There's a few countries that seems that are trying to get to the moon, presumably seeing as a stepping stone to the next, and the Japanese are very much in the race.
They are very much in the race. I don't know that they'll quote unquote get there first per se, but they want to make sure they're part of any future moon base operation that the United States is the center of. Japan was an early signatory of the Artemis Accords and has been a key participant in the International Space Station.
Hmm.
They built and operate the largest research module on the space station called Kibo, and have used that to extraordinary success. I mean, it's been an extraordinary generator of scientific and experimental output as well as technology testing.
Yeah.
And so one of the reasons they want to make sure they're part of any future commercial space station effort and have invested in all of them is they want to continue that legacy. Like they've built up a track record of very successful research operation on the ISS. When the ISS ends, they want to make sure they're part of the next generation of things. But probably won't be building. They probably won't be the center of any of those commercial space stations. They want
Sure.
to make sure they're a key collaborator. Same thing for a moon base.
I feel like there's I think the best way to sum this up is that people don't like to talk about history. They don't like to talk about multi-generational things. The idea of talking about Japanese trading houses sounds incredibly boring. But actually, the message for me is that I'm feeling inspired. And when you take a multi-generational view, and when there's persistence over time and over generations, when you can trace things back in a sort of a multi-century effort, you can expect to suddenly be exercising yourself literally in a non-terrestrial domain. It's looking like for these companies, it's routine for them. There's a pipeline of production where they're able to send things up into space and
Yeah.
support human life there. And these companies, you talked about going through a decapitation in a corporate sense after losing a war. Even the effect of at least the networking, the organizing effect somehow of what was left of these companies is still having an impact today and is still a part of the force, of Japan on the world. It's an inspiring story.
Yeah. I think it's a great example of how The value of an organization is often in the human connections within the organization, the human relationships, how teams get formed, how the people that know each other, the people that went to school together, and so on. And we certainly have plenty of examples of that in our countries. But in Japan, that's a key part of how organizations build themselves over time is a real investment in and a real care for long-term human relationships that may even span multiple generations. Like you run this geospatial 500 index. I've also been building up a supply chain database of all the Japanese companies involved in space and geospatial. And, I'd say well over half of them are, there's significant histories. They go back many generations, and a few of them back to the 1800s. And then another round of them that got formed after World War II and have continued to thrive since then, constantly kind of innovating into the next sector that they see as having opportunity.
There's two messages here. There's this conscientious stewardship in a multi-generational sort of a sense. But then you've emphasized that there is somehow still an entrepreneurial spirit or theme inside at least some of them.
I think they're very conscious of the fact that because they're have long traditions and cultures that can be an impediment to innovation, and so they're constantly spinning off companies to try new things out, and then if they're successful, sort of bringing them back into the fold. And then I'd say generally the Japanese as a culture is very entrepreneurial and innovative, and given a chance to form innovative enterprises. The Japanese are very good at it. I mean, there was that great window after World War II when, thousands of companies that became many of the household names we know today were formed. But I think there's a tremendous amount of a spirit of innovation and entrepreneurship there today as well.
Amazing. Well, that was a quick 40-minute tour. Robert, you've lived up to I hope the image that I built up in my brief introductory comments about you. You have an incredible amount of technical depth. You've been a founder yourself. You have a lot of cultural depth, far more than a lot of others can lay claim to, including being fluent in another language. So I feel like it's been a privilege to exercise that talent and that experience that you can bring to bear today. So thanks very much.
Well, it's an honor to have a chance to talk to you. I really admire what you're working on as well, and look forward to another opportunity to chat in the future.
So just like the episode with Abdul Fattah in Nigeria led to some really interesting discussion and awareness of some stocks. Actually, I discovered 3 stocks for the Geo 500 that relate to geospatial that are traded on the Nigerian Stock Exchange. We have here an episode that's starting to lift the covers on, take the lid off, provide insight into the aspect of the Geo 500 that is the upwards of 50 companies from Japan. Really, the standout issue for me was what happened when the US went in after having won World War II and they put an end to these monopolies. And what Robert said was this led to a flowering of competitive industry of entrepreneurship where household names emerged. For example, Honda, Sony, several companies that would not have had a chance to exist if these trading house monopolies had continued to exist. So we have a very important message about the state of our society today. It appears that we could do with a dose of the same medicine. We only have really rage from the underclass, constant frustration, complaints making its way into our political system in the form of populism against the billionaire, the oligarch class. And I think the best way to express how this is not useful to society is that our current class of billionaires and oligarchs are not deploying their capital effectively. I will return to my observation about Mark Zuckerberg. The poor guy who is has this fire hose of money from the Facebook ad machine has been engaging in obvious, undeniably poor capital deployment. He wasted $80 billion on the metaverse, and the Horizon Worlds, the metaverse that he created, was known for having about 900 concurrent users. Surely there is no clearer example in recent history of poor capital allocation by our billionaire oligarch monopolists from the social media revolution. So Robert Cheatham gives us an answer how to deal with that. It is a robust round of trust busting. Thanks, Robert, for the message.